Hello and welcome. My name's Nikki Kerr, and I have a company called Great Futures, which deals in all sorts of things to do with leadership, development, training, coaching, and really lots of professional development. Now, today we're going to be talking about the underpinning knowledge for the principles and practice of assessment. Now, for some of you, you'll already be assessors, and this will be CPD, Continual Professional Development, very important. And for others, it might be your first step towards a new career or maybe a new branch, whatever it is, but certainly something towards becoming an assessor. Now, the PowerPoint we've got here is quite long. It's the best part of an hour, and if you click onto the link that's within this as well, it'll take you a bit longer. So do stop when you've had enough. Take it in little bites, whatever suits you, and come back to it at your leisure. Okay, so the key concepts and principles of assessment. Let's go. Okay, so the aim for today and for this little bite is to understand the principles, as I said, and requirements for assessment. So quite specifically, by the end of today, you're going to be able to explain the function of assessment in learning and development, so what that's all about, define the key concepts and principles of assessment. You'll see there's lots of those. Explain the responsibilities of the assessor, and identify the regulations and requirements relevant to the assessment in your own area of practice. Now, by the time you've got to the end of today's, as I say, today's little bite, you'll be able to fill in a sheet of some short questions and tick boxes that you've got accompanying this, and this will then lead into your workbook. So those little tick boxes are really for an aid memoir. They're not going to be all you need by the time you start writing in your workbook. So anything else, any key points that come out, you might want to look to see what slide it's on and take any notes. But obviously you've got this, so you can look back and go through it at your own pace whenever you want to. So let's begin. Okay, so first of all, what's your experience of assessment? Your own experience. If you think when the times when you've been assessed, where were we being assessed? When were we doing it? Why were we doing it? And how? And who was assessing us? Who are the assessors? Take a little moment, just think back. And it's interesting, as you're thinking back, this might bring up some sort of emotional responses to assessment, negative, positive. Let's have a quick look on the next screen here. Did you come up with thoughts of when you were in school, perhaps the end of term assessments, the exams right at the end of the term, the summer ones? Perhaps you had a scary experience, perhaps you didn't like them. Other people really love them. And obviously, you may well have progressed and passed your driving tests. Sometimes these are quite scary. And all these sort of feelings, that assessment and testing, those words, all those feelings, they're the sort of feelings that your learners are going to be experiencing as well. Some of them will be excited because perhaps they're doing this qualification to have some sort of, I don't know, future. Maybe it may be a future raise in work. It may be something that they've got to achieve, or perhaps it's to open some doors for further qualifications. Who knows? But you could well have already experienced some sort of on-site training. Perhaps you've done something like perhaps first aid training that was necessary in your line of work, or you might have done something in sports. Perhaps you learnt to dive, and whatever it was that you learnt and you were assessed to do, you had to reach a certain standard, a certain level of competence before you were given some sort of qualification or certificate to give you like that stamp of approval, say that yes, I am competent. And it could be that some of you may well have experienced the sort of NVQ diploma type of assessments that go on in workplace today, and these are the ones that are really going to be relevant to you, these sort of experiences that you may have had in the past, or you may be just learning about them for the first time today. This is on the job learning. The apprenticeships are really the way that the government believes is going to make a great difference to the future capabilities of people within the workplace. So what's the function of all this? What is the function of assessment and learning and development? Well, First of all, is to ascertain if learning has occurred. And so, for example, the skills and the competencies, knowledge, understanding, and obviously the attitudes that might be, in fact, in leadership and management, which is the one I'm currently assessing and doing the quality assurance for. The attitudes of leaders is very, very important, but it's the attitude across the whole of the workforce. If you didn't assess, you wouldn't know whether learning had taken place. And as I said before, assessment can be towards formal qualification. So, example, it could be an award, a certificate, or a diploma. And some of you will be doing the certificate in assessment, and others will be doing diplomas, the further qualification. It could be a qualification for a knowledge base, assessing the understanding, or performance based, and often these are mixed, assessing practical skills. Alternatively, you might even be assessing an employee's competence in the workplace. This might be towards a formal qualification, or it could be a company standard, just to prove that they can perform the requirements of their job specification. So lots of different opportunities there for assessment to be taking place. So straight away you can start to see how valuable this qualification that you're taking right now is going to be. Assessment should focus on improving and reinforcing learning, as well as measuring an achievement. It should also help your learners to realise how they're progressing and what they need to do to improve or progress further. Whenever you're in contact with your learners, you will be observing them. You'll be watching what they're doing, asking them questions, and listening, reviewing their progress all the time. So whether it's formal or whether it's under a certain sort of test type condition, you're always assessing people. And if you teach or you train, you'll also be seeing your learners demonstrate their knowledge and skills. And this would be something they do quite regularly. For example, through some sort of activity. Maybe it's a discussion, perhaps you've got a group discussion going, or some sort of regular task that you're just watching and taking on board whether they're doing that according to the standards required. So you're constantly making judgments about progress, how they could improve, and it's important to be aware that obviously the impact of your feedback can have a great deal of impact on the learner's confidence. So be careful how you give feedback. Specifically focus on the activity or the work produce, rather than sort of the individuals who, this sort of thing will be much more helpful and motivating for your learners. Assessment should not be confused with evaluation. Assessment is of the learner, evaluation is of the program that the learner is taking. So for example, a qualification, assessment is specific towards learners' achievement and how they can improve. Evaluation is a quality assurance monitoring tool, and everything you do will feed into the quality assurance. That'll actually include feedback from your learners. For example, it might even be their employers or their line managers. Lots of ways you're going to be obtaining information that will feed into the overall learner experience and the quality assurance of your course, as well as your own practice actually. So facilitating learning and assessment. So this goes into learning outcome 1.12, and as you can see there's a link on the bottom here, so in a minute you might want to just stop this recording, just stop the pause and have a look at this. It's a very, very relevant link which will help you to understand about the different styles of assessment the different types of assessment that take place without even really thinking about it in a learning environment. Now this specifically has been taken from TESS, which is an excellent site for people who teach in schools, but it's really relevant to learning in the adult environment as well. So while you're looking at this, see if you can spot how the teacher actually facilitates the different parts of the learning and assessment process. See if you can spot the initial learning that goes on, the self-assessment that goes on, peer assessment, the formative, and of course the summative assessment. No assessment is complete without a summative assessment. So pause this just now and I shall see you in, what I think, about 15 minutes or something. Perhaps it's not even quite that long, and we'll take this forward. Did you spot it? She was a lovely teacher, wasn't she? Gosh, I wish we had teachers like that when I was in school. She asked them what they already know about the subject. Did you spot that? That's an initial assessment. You know, when you first came on the course here, you'll have undertaken some sort of initial assessment yourself, and that will have been a process where you were asked what you already know of the subject. Very, very important in learning and development. What do people already know about the subject? Where are they? And that will inform us as learning professionals and teaching professionals what the gaps are. What is it that we need to be teaching them? We may have come with a ready prepared session, but actually we really need to understand what the learner needs to learn to achieve the outcomes. And then she told them what they would be able to do, the learning intention, a success criteria. You know, it's very, very important that learners understand, remember that saying, the end in mind. They understand what it is they're trying to achieve, where they're trying to get to. And she encouraged them to discuss and share their ideas. Did you spot that? She encouraged them. It wasn't like the old days when you weren't supposed to talk in class. This was a really interactive learning experience. Excuse me. And she encouraged them to learn from each other. This is peer learning. Share your ideas. And these ideas might have been different between the individuals, but each individual was learning. And perhaps they'd take it on board. Perhaps they'd only take on board what was applicable to what they wanted to know. But that's peer learning. And in fact, we know that peer learning is probably the most important thing that we do in our lives. Most of us learn our beliefs, our values, everything like that comes from peer learning, as well as academic knowledge. And in your case, you're going to be doing peer learning in the form of shadowing. You're going to be paired up with another assessor who's got a lot of experience, and you'll be able to take on board her experience or his experience, as well as utilise what you've learned in the sessions that you're undertaking at the moment. These sort of informal learning processes, they're going to really help you put things in context and give you some sort of learning diversity. Did you notice how she was asking them skillful questions to develop their personal learning and thinking skills? Sometimes you're going to come across in your assessment programs the need to be able to identify where learners have been given the opportunity to demonstrate their personal learning and thinking skills. And in this case, she encouraged them to research, didn't she? And they all went off and they did their thing on computers. How are we getting on? Can we take it further? That was exactly what she was saying. What can we do now? And then about halfway through, she interrupted the learning. She checked the knowledge and understanding. So that was formative. She was checking where they were up to. If you went through the whole of the if you went through the whole of your programs with your learners without giving them any feedback, some people would be quite nervous about whether or not they were doing the right thing, and they might feel discouraged. They might think, I don't know whether I'm following the right map, whether I'm going to get to the right place. So it's really, really important that you give lots of feedback all the way through your learning process. In fact, you'll find some people want to wait until the end of perhaps they've got a knowledge assignment or something to write, and they might want to wait until they've completed this themselves, very independent learners. Encourage them just to pop it back to you now and then, just to help make sure that they're on track. There's nothing worse than giving a lot of effort to something to find you are going in the wrong direction. So by checking part way through and giving that encouraging and progressive feedback, you can really help people to feel confident and motivated to continue. So the learners produced a poster at the end. Did you notice that? And they demonstrated their understanding in their own little way. And this helped build their confidence. It helped them to share their achievements. And your learners will be demonstrating their confidence. In the adult environments, it may not be applicable to be doing posters, but they'll be demonstrating their knowledge to you or their competence in some way or other. And it's up to you through the assessment process to decide with your learner what's going to be the most appropriate way that they enjoy doing. It's really important that they enjoy doing whatever they are about to produce. So let's just look a little here about the concepts of assessment. This is the overall concepts of assessment. These are the aspects involved through the assessment process. Accountability. What do we mean by accountability? Well, this, for example, is your need to be accountable to your learners and the organisations to ensure that you're carrying out your role as you need to be. And also to ensure that your learners are accountable for their own knowledge and their acquisition of this. And their achievement. Learners need to be to really feel that they're achieving. So sometimes as an assessor you might feel it's easier just to help them along a bit. If you do too much, they're not going to feel that they've achieved their qualification. The assessment strategies, you're going to learn much more about assessment strategies when you start shadowing, but the assessment strategies are perhaps the most important thing that you will be following. So it's the route map, and it's the different ways that you'll be helping learners to achieve in a way that's suitable and fair to them. And of course you can look about benchmarking. There's going to be guidance to make sure that all assessment processes are standardized. For instance, your qualification identifies key areas that you need to achieve in order to ensure that you can be competent at what you're doing. And this is the case through all qualifications. There will be key areas, key points that learners need to achieve, and that's the benchmarking. So let's look a little bit now at the key concepts of assessment. So if you just skim right down to the bottom here, you've already looked at the types of assessment, the initial, so that's the one at the beginning, the formative, the ongoing, or the summative right at the end. That's the sort of stuff you saw in the little clip from Tess there. So what other key concepts are there of assessment? So the evaluation of assessment process should always take place to inform current and future practice. All the aspects of the assessment cycle should be evaluated on an ongoing basis, and obviously feedback obtained from all the people involved. Now, whether this is formal or informal, feedback from everybody is key to your own learning experience and your own development of the process. Internally devised assessments might be produced by by somebody within your organisation. I devise a lot of assessments. You might start devising your own as you get a little bit more confident about what's going on, what you need to produce. But there's also external assessments provided, normally in the form of qualification tests or exams. BTEC tend to write their own. You tend to have to follow what it is they want testing, and that's quite to the letter actually. It's not terribly flexible in some cases. But you'll also be doing projects, questions, all sorts of things that will help the learner to demonstrate and help you to evaluate their knowledge. So these sort of internally devised assessments, they really need to be fit for purpose, and we'll talk about that a bit more as we go through. As I say, the externally devised ones are already checked that they are fit for purpose. Progression is another really key concept of assessment. As I said before, your learner needs to know they're progressing, and actually studies have shown that even if they're not very motivated, because sometimes taking time out of work to do something like this or adding anything extra into their day might be quite a challenge. But if somebody can see that they're progressing, then it's going to help them to overcome that challenge, and it really needs to be fed back on a regular basis. So they may only achieve one or two little outcomes from quite a large set of outcomes, but it's important to really tick those boxes as soon as they occur, so they know that they're constantly constantly going in the right direction. It's also very important that we're transparent. You mustn't be tempted. It's very easy to be tempted to give a lot of praise And really, if you're praising somebody because you want them to feel good rather than because they've been excelling at whatever it is they've been trying to achieve, they could misunderstand and you could end up really misleading them. So transparency, be honest, be careful how you give your constructive feedback, but it is necessary and it will help them to progress. And actually, some learners will take this on board in a different way to others. If somebody's always been used to achieving and not very good at receiving critical feedback, then this will be something that you have to think about when you're addressing things. So always, what was good, specifically to do with whatever it was they produced, not themselves. So very objective. What was good, and how they can progress, and what steps, at whatever pace they need to achieve it, what steps they have to undertake to get the full accreditation. And just to recap there, initial assessment at the beginning, formative, ongoing. So that formative is the progression, and obviously the summative at the end is when you say, wow, this is all achieved, fabulous. And now we do whatever it is we have to do next. Principles of assessment. Now, in your handout that I've sent along with this, the first part of this, 1.2 talks about the 5 correct concepts and principles. Really, the 5 there are talking about the types of assessment. But as you can see, there's a lot more principles of assessment, and we're going to go into the rest of those now. So when you come to write your workbooks, you will have to make reference to this slide and the information that's going to come in the next few minutes. So the principles, how is the assessment process put into practice? So is it ethical? Are you ensuring that the assessment process is honest and it's moral? And obviously it's got to take into account confidentiality. Sometimes you'll be looking at maybe even letters or emails that your learners have produced, and this is going to demonstrate all sorts of things for them. But you have to be very ethical about the confidential information that might be being put your way. And integrity. Everything you do has to be with integrity. Is it fair? Is the assessment activity actually fit for purpose? Has it been planned? Are the decisions and the feedback justifiable? Is it fair? And is it safe? So are you using methods that are ethical? When I'm talking about ethical in this respect, I'm thinking about the learner's way. If a learner has completed an initial assessment, that will often, in fact it should, include their learning style. If you're using a style that's really not very suitable for them, then they might not feel safe. If you want them to write and they don't like writing, then many levels of the assessment process can be achieved, using other methods. And it's important to use methods that are fair and safe to the learner. So there's and obviously you've got to understand, in this day and age, a lot of research will take place, and you must encourage that for their personal learning and thinking skills. But be aware that it's very easy to pick up things off the internet, and without even any intention, they could be quite a chance of plagiarism, and your own organisation should be able to give you some sort of guidance around this. There's usually a policy about plagiarism. But also be very aware that all you have to do these days is pick up a few sentences from somebody's, maybe it's an assignment, pick up a few sentences, put it up in Google, and more often than not it'll come up with the exact places that this was picked up from, where these words appeared on the internet in that particular order. So be aware to also be very conscious to explain what plagiarism is and how to avoid it when you're talking to your learners. So everything's got to be ethical, fair and safe. And there's 2 more important principles that are known as VACSR and SMART. Now SMART you've probably heard of before. VACSR is something that you're going to be really trying to get your head around very quickly, because it's very, very important for the quality assurance as well as your own learning practice. So what is this VACSR? Valid is whatever you've asked the learner to do. Is it a valid way of showing that they can do something? Is it fit for purpose? Is it going to provide evidence? Is it going to demonstrate that they are actually competent? Authentic. Now, I've just talked about plagiarism. Make sure that the learner understands all about this and they are able to show or sign something to say that it's their authentic work. Is it current? Have they done it within the last couple of years? Whatever it is, knowledge moves on, doesn't it? And certainly in this day and age of very fast-paced technology, is it current? If it's about 5 years old, whatever experience they're bringing to something, perhaps you need to check that it is current and up-to-date. Is whatever they've provided, is it sufficient? Does it cover all the criteria? Now, sufficiency is quite subjective, isn't it? So you've got to make that decision. Is it sufficient? Is anybody who comes to check this particular piece of evidence, are they going to feel it's sufficient? And is it reliable? Is it consistent over time? Is it reliable enough so as perhaps another assessor could come in and they would also come to the same decision? Is it reliable? Is it valid, authentic, current, sufficient and reliable? Really, really got to get your head around this as quickly as you can. So I'm just going to ask you, which of the following, and I don't expect everybody to get this right first time, but it's something that should hold in your mind, which of the following assessment methods would be a valid way for assessing that somebody is able to do something? Now you can think to yourself, I'll ask them a series of questions, I'll look at a work product, I'll observe them, I will get a reliable witness testimony, I'll ask them to write an assignment, I'll ask them to reflect on something that they've done and ask a manager to testify its content is correct. Now, which of those is going to say that somebody is able to do something? Well, let's look at what isn't going to. First of all, if you ask somebody to write an assignment, that's really going to be testing their knowledge and understanding, not necessarily that they're able to do something. If you ask them a series of questions, are they able to do something? You have to be very careful with questions again. Are you just questioning knowledge? I will look at work products. Work products often can be something that demonstrates competency, that they're able to do something because they've produced something themselves. As long as they have produced it themselves, if you observe them, that's possibly one of the strongest ways to make sure that somebody is able to do something. It's not going to demonstrate they understand why, but it could demonstrate that they're able to do something. A witness testimony. If it's a manager's witness testimony of somebody reliable, somebody who knows the standards, what they should be achieving, you know, it's no good asking somebody who doesn't know what good looks like. What about if they reflect on something? Often this is something learners enjoy doing, reflecting on an occasion when they've had to do something. Now we have to obviously make sure that this is valid and reliable, and it was their own work. So a reflection should be signed or checked by somebody else to give that validity to it. So just a few ways that you can check valid. And we're going to go into this in a lot more detail, different types of assessment during the next clip, which takes us into learning outcome 2. The other thing you're going to be looking at, which of these assessment methods would be valid for assessing that someone can explain or evaluate something? So it's important that the level of knowledge achieved set by the awarding body is demonstrated. And this is identified by the verbs used usually. Now usually it'll say evaluate, identify, or explain. So the learner can, if the learner can identify something, that's quite a basic level of understanding, be enough for some levels of assessment. If they can explain, that's a higher level of cognitive ability, and if they can analyse and evaluate, that's even higher. But often, if you're assessing one of the relevant higher programs, perhaps a level 3, 4, 5, and above, they might have to go through all of those. They might have to identify something, then explain it, and then do a form of analysis or evaluation. So it's often incorporates all of them. So think about these again. You know, if you want somebody to explain or evaluate something, a series of questions is pretty good for that, and pretty efficient way of finding out, because you can just keep asking and asking and asking until they've really clarified what it is you want them to explain. If you look at work products, it depends what the work product is, but be careful. Was it theirs? Can they still explain? Perhaps you want to ask them some questions or have a professional discussion around some work products. Always try to validate whatever they're giving you and extend it if it's not quite enough or sufficient. Okay, so the other thing that you need to remember is SMART. Now, you've probably come across this. You might have had SMART key performance indicators or SMART targets of your own. Is the assessment criteria, are the learning outcomes, are they specific? Do they specifically know what they need to achieve? What is a success criteria? Specific. Is it measurable? Can you measure it against something else to say whether it is right or wrong, whether it's sufficient? Is it achievable? Is it something they are able to achieve? Or perhaps there's a step or two before that they need to take? Is it relevant? And is it time bound? If you don't give somebody a time to do something, they'll do it in their own time, which may be quite different to your own. So let's go on now to 1.13. Main responsibility. There are lots of responsibilities that the assessor has to take on board, but your main responsibility will be to carry out the assessments according to the qualification requirements, or those of the programme or job specification, whatever it is you're being asked to assess, and also to follow all internal and external organisational requirements, which we will go into in the next couple of slides. Now, the first thing, to carry out assessments according to the qualification requirements, you will have received the qualification specification for assessing as part of your own qualification that you're undertaking now. Now, this will have come from the awarding body itself, and sometimes awarding bodies are slightly different in the way they want things to be assessed, the different control measures they put around. Usually it's generally within the same ballpark. So it's very important to read not just the learning outcomes for the particular units that have been chosen, but there's a little bit of a preamble before you get that information, and that tells you what it is specifically to that organisation that's important. Even things like to be able to assess a qualification, it'll tell you what the requirements are, and this is general across all awarding bodies. To deliver a qualification, you need to be competent in it yourself and knowledgeable. Some awarding bodies insist that you're already qualified, others are able to allow you to do this if you've got sufficient experience. So always look to see that you are assessing in accordance to the qualification requirements or those of the programme or job specification. So how is all this achieved? Well, you'll be attending lots of meetings, not right the way through, but you'll be always involving your employers, sponsors, learners, the assessment centre. You may well even be involved in the external process, and we'll look at that a bit further as we go along. These meetings are to ensure that the assessment process is going according to plan. Planning is massive in assessment. If you don't plan, you're planning to fail. That's what I learned when I first got into all this. You'll be negotiating and agreeing assessment plans with your learners. It's very important that they are part of the whole process, and they actually have the opportunity to say their preferred way of demonstrating something, and they may well come up with things that you didn't even think of. You have to make use of all the different types and methods of assessment. As we go through to the next session, you're going to learn that there's lots of opportunities. It's not just writing and watching people. You can ask questions, there's professional discussion, there's witness testimonies. There's lots of ways of making things really efficient and effective and interesting. Keep the interest there. You'll be reviewing learners' progress constantly throughout the programme. You'll be recording things and maintaining records within the learner's portfolio. It's very important that these are kept up to date, not only for the learner's progress and feedback, but also for the quality assurance. Your internal quality assurer will be making appointments to see portfolios a couple of times, maybe 2-3 times throughout the process, and they'll want to see that these records are being kept up to date. And the key thing about a portfolio is it's like an index. So it'll be, by the time, if you've never seen a portfolio, they can get quite fat actually. By the time your learners started to get lots of information there that demonstrates, or work products or whatever it is that demonstrates their competency, anybody who picks up that portfolio has to be able to look at a criteria and then identify exactly where it is. It's rather like, think of a library that has a good system, so as you can say, oh, I want to find this book, and actually you don't want to be looking for hours, you want to be able to go straight to that book. And that's exactly how you need to think of the portfolio records, like an index that helps somebody get from this is the assessment criteria I want to look at, and this is where I can find it. Has it been assessed? Yes, it has, because it's been signed off by the assessor. And even if the external quality assurance comes in, they'll be wanting to know, when I say external quality assurance, I mean from the awarding bodies, they'll be wanting to know exactly the same thing. There'll be spot checking all the way through. And so, yeah, reviewing learner progress is very, very important. Standardizing practice with other assessors. Now, what am I talking about here? It's very important that this is not just a subjective judgment. This is quite objective. Every judgment that you make would be consistent, never mind who is assessing. And the best way to do this is to come to the standardization meetings, which usually about 3 or 4 times a year. And again, these are recorded for quality assurance progress. And the awarding body needs to make sure that these are taking place. So you come along, and the meetings will be an opportunity for you to share how individually you assess something, and share them, swap them over with other assessors, and make sure that they would make the same decision given the information that's been presented. Perhaps you'll share your knowledge of what's working, what isn't working. You'll come up with great ideas. This is an opportunity for everybody to be involved. Nobody wants to be dictated to if they've found that something isn't actually working for them, and this is a great opportunity for you to have your say and to share your practice. Now, in bold at the bottom there, completing and maintaining records. That is perhaps one of the most, from a quality assurance point of view, that's one of the most important things, because that is your diary. That's how you've helped these learners to demonstrate their competency. And this again needs to be very efficient and very exact, actually. Easy to follow. Okay, so giving constructive and developmental feedback to learners. This is something, all learners are going to be juggling work, families, personal lives, and keeping the assessment process up to date and on track can just battle with priorities. So it's imperative that we take every opportunity to motivate and show progress. And identifying dealing with any barriers to fair assessment. Your learner has the right to actually complain or bring up something if they think they're not being fairly assessed. And it's really identifying the policies, procedures again, and there should be something in their portfolio right at the beginning to help them deal with complaints, but also to help you deal with anything. If you feel that something isn't fair, you need to be able to ensure that adequate procedures are put in place to rectify this. Making judgments based on the assessment requirements. Now, it's very important that you're being objective, that the assessment requirements are complete 100%, that if any other assessor assessed your learner, that they would come to the same judgment. So always based on the assessment requirements, making sure that you really understand what the verbs mean and you help the learner to understand exactly what's required. Now, you've also got a responsibility, and this will be something that's checked throughout the period you're an assessor. Actually, you've got a responsibility to make sure your own continuous professional development is up to date, your CPD. You'll be asked when you go to apply for a position as an assessor to produce your CPD, and this could be in the form of recent practice. Your practice should be recent and relevant. It could be when you've gone to workshops. You might actually go and attend workshops with the awarding bodies to get up to date on their assessment processes. That's all part of your CPD. Attending the standardisation meetings, that's continual professional development because you're sharing ideas, and obviously doing research under your own steam. And of course, supporting any other learners with special assessment requirements. Again, there's going to be policies around that you can have a look at, and you should be familiar with these before you even start assessing people. Dealing with things sensitively and in a supportive manner. Say, for instance, your learner's dyslexic and they come to you and say, actually, I'd really rather you put something on coloured paper. Now, a supportive way to do this and a sensitive way to do this might be to, rather than just single them out if you're in a classroom sort of environment, rather than to single them out with perhaps a blue or pastel coloured paper that assists them with their reading, why not just give everybody this pastel coloured paper? You don't need to single somebody out and perhaps embarrass them. So lots of ways you can deal with sensitive issues. Listening and really asking your learners what would help them. So this is leading us right to the end of the Learning Outcome 1.1.4, regulations relating to assessment. Now, why are we so highly regulated? Let's start with this first. If anybody could give out a qualification, it really wouldn't be very valuable. A qualification is there to ensure that you are competent in something. And if you go to any job site these days, the majority of them will be asking for qualifications in X, Y, and Z. And that's to prove that you're competent, to prove to the employer that you're competent to do something. Now, where do these competencies come from? Ofqual is the regulator of qualifications, examinations and assessments in England and vocational qualifications in Northern Ireland, and they're actually responsible for maintaining the standards. Now, these standards come from National Operational Standards, NOS. And NOS will actually state what competencies somebody needs in a certain role. So there'll be different operational standards depending on, I don't know, maybe you're a nurse, you're a manager, whatever your profession is, there'll be different competencies that are required to enable you to perform your role. So Ofqual regulates these. Now they turn national operational standards into qualifications, and then the awarding bodies are the people who turn these qualifications into courses. Now Ofsted, you can see that hovering over on the left. I'll talk about Ofsted in a minute. They have a certain responsibility as well. But if we go from the top, Ofqual does the qualifications, awarding bodies set the courses, the standards, and that's the standards just like the ones you're looking at for your own qualification. Your own centre will be registered with an awarding body, and they'll have had to have proven themselves as competent to do that, and have the right skills involved to be able to run qualifications. And then your centre will have maybe one, maybe two, maybe, I don't know, it depends how big your centre is, but they'll have internal quality assurance themselves. And the internal quality assurance makes sure that the assessors are appropriately qualified and supported to deliver these assessment processes to the different learners. So there's various different people involved. From an assessor's point of view, you probably get more involved with your quality assurance and the centre itself. You're not necessarily going to be too involved with the awarding body or Ofqual, but you may well get involved with Ofsted. Ofsted doesn't just look after schools. Ofsted also monitor the qualifications, the delivery of qualifications for anybody who's involved in the teaching and learning process. They will inspect schools and provision in colleges, and they're actually part of the Common Inspection Framework. So it could well be that your centre will have its Ofsted day just the same as a school will, and it's your responsibility, along with your quality assurance, to make sure that everything's in order, just as in schools, everything is in order, so as Ofsted can come and check that the procedures are taking place that are going to enable the learners to have the most effective form of teaching, learning and assessment. So everything is really quite highly regulated, and if somebody asks you to do something and you're not quite sure why you're being asked to do it, just ask them, because it'll be because it has to feed into some sort of regulation. So Ofqual awarding bodies, centres, IQAs, assessors and the learners, and obviously somewhere in there between the assessors and the learners there'll be a connection with the employers as well. And of course there's legal aspects, so including the Data Protection Act. Are you familiar with the Data Protection Act? Should you really be going on a little bit of a course? There's lots of online courses. Your organisation may actually provide this for you. Do you know what this involves? Health and Safety at Work Act, the Safeguarding Vulnerable Adults Act, and you may well have been asked to provide a DBS. Equalities, Counter-Terrorism Security Act. That's something that has to be up to date now with the new regulations. Let's just look a bit more into the Data Protection Act. This was 1998, so it's mandatory for all organisations that hold personal data that's processed in any way. But it's also important for yourself that you're aware of your responsibility here. Are you able to keep data safe? Is it going to fall accidentally into somebody else's hands? If you're assessing and you're not part of a large organisation where you're going in and perhaps you're not fully under full employment, maybe you're a contractor or something, is wherever the information is kept, is it safe? Now, if it's on a computer and you've got adequate software and things are password protected, that's fine. But portfolios often hold a lot of confidential information, certainly work products. Are your portfolios safe? Is there a risk that you're going to leave them on the tube or the bus or something? You know, this is the sort of stuff that you have to be very aware of for your own data protection responsibility. So it was originally this was passed in 1998 rather. Obviously, it's had extensions, and I've put a little link here to what the new GDPR is going to mean. And it's worth having a look. It's quite possible that not a great deal of it relates to you directly. It's more about processing information from perhaps the organisation's point of view. But as I said, if you're a contractor or you're self-employed, which is the same sort of thing, you're going to have to make sure that you are up to date with all the GDPR and you pass all the regulatory requirements. Okay, so the Acts contain 8 principles to ensure that data are processed fairly and lawfully, obtained and used only for specified and lawful purposes, adequate, relevant and not excessive, so there's no need to collect data that isn't relevant to the purpose. Are they accurate, and where necessary is it kept up to date? Keep it for no longer than is necessary. Now your organisation will take files off you, portfolios rather, when they're completed. And there are certain parts of these portfolios that are kept by the organisation, but the evidence is given back. It's usually the records, the process that was involved in the qualification that's kept by the organisation. But as I say, the rest is given back. The main portfolio of evidence is given back once the learner has achieved a certificate. Processed in accordance with the individual's rights. Have to ensure that you're aware of what the individual's rights are, and is it kept secure? As I said, if you're doing things in your own home, have you got a locked cabinet? You know, is it likely to be left out somewhere where it can get into somebody else's hands? And is data transferred only to countries that offer adequate protection? Now, I have to make sure that we're not only governed by the UK, but if data is likely to go outside the UK, it's only going to places where they have data protection themselves. Okay, so health and safety at work. You're going to need to follow various regulations. For example, this Health and Safety at Work Act. And Don't forget the health and safety of yourself, your colleagues and your learners is paramount importance. So are you familiar with the Act? You might have to carry out a risk assessment to ensure the areas that you're working within, the areas of assessment activities, are safe for all concerned, not just the learner, for everybody concerned. And it can normally be achieved by sort of walkthrough of the area and a discussion with those involved. Now I'm going to tell you a little story about some years ago. I was actually contracted to take a certain group of learners through their NVQ process, it was in those days, and it was across all the prisons in south of England. And this meant actually going in the prisons continuously, which it's actually a lot more fun than you might imagine. But I came across a rather worrying or concerning incident where I didn't think either the learner or myself were particularly safe. And it was my responsibility as the assessor, because the learner had tried to bring this up with their manager, but it was my responsibility as the assessor to make sure that this learner was safe. So what I actually did, I raised this with their management. I raised the fact that the environment wasn't safe, and it was in turn raised with the governors. This was the prison governors and also the various matrixed management that I was involved with. And we did manage to get the environments made much safer. And so just to let you know, if you spot something that contravenes with health and safety at work, it is your responsibility to bring this to light. If you don't feel able to do this directly yourself, then get in touch with your internal quality assurance and they'll give you a hand. But as I say, ethically, we have to make sure that the learner is safe, that we are safe, and everything is fit for purpose. And obviously records have to be kept about anything that you bring up. So safeguarding vulnerable groups. So assessors may need to attend different safeguarding training. Certainly if you're in health and safety, health and social care or educational services, you're going to have to deal with this quite frequently. Some staff every 2 years, depending on their involvement. But assessors have a duty of care and a personal responsibility towards all learners, and they need to be able to apply 6 elements of appropriate service provision. And really, if you just remember that you need to be respectful, respect your learner, have dignity, help them have dignity, independence, help them to be independent, ensure that their individuality is respected, give them choice, and perhaps above all, be confidential. You know, you're going to have some special relationships with your learners at times, and they may well share things with you that need to be kept confidential. Whatever's in the room stays in the room. That's really the rule of thumb with any sort of education. And of course, you may have been asked to complete a DBS if you didn't already have one, disclosure and barring service. There are different levels of DBS, and your organisation will let you know which one you need to do, whether it's the enhanced or whether it's just the lighter version. Okay, the Equality Act 2010. So all learners should have equal opportunity throughout all of the assessment process. And really, when part of the initial assessment, before people are even enrolled, needs to ensure that they have the ability. You know, if your program involves a lot of writing, say for instance at a technical level, and your learner isn't at that particular level, maybe they should go on another course first. It's your duty to signpost people to whatever appropriate steps they need to take to be to have equal opportunity to the course that you're providing. And your organisation will have equal opportunity policies in place. This will be a necessity for them being part of the awarding body's certification process. And it's really important that you check with that, become really familiar. Assessment of activities should always reflect the diverse nature of your learners as well. For example, you know, it could be culturally different, language, ethnicity, shouldn't be just biased according to the person producing them. And things like jargon and terminology. Yes, it may be that you're teaching people terminology, but because they need to use terminology within the assessment process to prove competency and actually become fluent in that particular level. I know, for instance, again, I'm going to refer to the leadership and management courses. There is a terminology that's expected to be used, terms of phrase, and this is part of being a leader and manager, so as you can communicate effectively with other people at your level. But it's important, whilst your learners are in a learning stage, that jargon and terminology is explained to them, because we mustn't exclude people just because they don't know. They may well have been doing something all the time. One I come across at the moment is people who are quite involved in strategy, but they haven't been using strategic tools, or at least they don't think they've been using strategic tools, because the jargon or the terminology applied to them isn't something they're familiar with. So mustn't place any learner at disadvantage. And you also need to be very careful that you're not discriminating against your learner in any way. The Counter-Terrorism Act and Security Act, so this is the one that came about in 2015. There's a link at the bottom here. If you haven't come across prevent training, it's advisable to just click on this link. It's free, and then it's another something for your CPD. It'll also enlighten you as to what the Counter-Terrorism Security Act involves and your place in providing safeguarding within this area. Policies and procedures. I think you've probably already gone through policies and procedures during your induction, certainly some of them. So just have a look. The sort of things that this would include would be, as I've mentioned before, access to fair assessment, appeals and complaints, confidentiality of information, copyright and data protection, so that's plagiarism, equality and diversity, health and safety and welfare, and you should be getting familiar now with the internal quality assurance process. And again, there'll be handouts to, policies about this that you should become. So in true sort of teacher fashion, we've come up with a summary quiz. Now, this is just a little something for you to think about. Make sure that you have absorbed the sort of information that you're going to need. Think of one reason why assessment should take place. Quite nice if this was a webinar now and you could shout it back to me. Just make a little note, check your own learning. You can always flick back through the screens. This was quite a long session today. State 2 examples of key concepts of assessment. Can you do that? There was lots of them, wasn't there? Key concepts of assessment. What do these stand for? VACSR. What does this stand for? Oh, I was almost about to tell you then. What does SMART stand for? And explain what principles of assessment are. So we've got key concepts. Number 2. What are the principles? Okay. Just so as you've got further reading, Anne Gravel's Achieving Your Assessment and Quality Assurance Units. Fabulous book, not massive, easy to flick through, and a lot of what we've done today has come from her own PowerPoints. Actually, some of it I've obviously updated myself and brought my own experience into it, but a lot of it is based. Anne Gravel's is probably the guru for assessors. So I certainly recommend that if you decide just to buy one book, that's going to be extremely useful for you. Various websites that you might want to have a look at when you get the opportunity, or perhaps when it becomes relevant to you. Obviously, there's a disclosure and barring service. That will give you opportunity to find out how you can get your DBS if your particular organisation doesn't do it for you. Government legislations, there's lots of stuff on there about teaching and learning. Ofqual, you can have a look for yourself if you want to. Ofsted, and obviously, as I've put up before, if you want to do some free training, and it doesn't take that long, prevent for offending training, then that's the safeguarding link there, and you will come up with a certificate that you can then keep and put as part of your CPD. So I hope you've enjoyed Wow, gosh, we're nearly an hour. I would suggest that this is perhaps a program that you come back to as and when you need to within your qualification. And yeah, we'll see you shortly for part 2.